All right. Hello, it's me, Mike, with HPDS. I'm going to go ahead and get started into a Genesis 25 video today. Genesis 25, I'll be reading and studying that through this video. So before I get started, I'll go ahead and do the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May your kingdom come, and may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Please give me this day my daily bread, and forgive me of my debt, as I forgive those in debt to me. And Lord, lead me not into temptation, but instead deliver me from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom of power and glory, Lord, forever and ever. Amen. All right, so we're getting into Genesis 25. And if you recall, Genesis 25 is halfway through Genesis, which got 50 chapters in it. I went over chapter 24 last, and chapter 24 was really long. Really long. It's probably the longest chapter that I've come across, 67 verses long. And it was basically just talking about the servant's journey, Abraham's servant, who went on a journey to go get a wife for Isaac. So in chapter 25, we're going to see, let's hear what we see. Here's a little outline. We're going to see the sons of Abraham by Keturah. We're going to see Rebekah gives birth to Esau and Jacob. And then we're going to see that Esau sells his birthright. So we're going to see this right away. First off, we'll see Abraham gets a new wife into his old age. And he's going to have some more children. So God blesses him with children through another wife. So let's take a look at Genesis 25. And here I am. Let's see. Then again, Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. And Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Asherim, and Letushim, and Leumim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Abida, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. But unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 160 years. Then Abraham gave up the ghost, and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre. The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac. And Isaac dwelt by the well Laharoi. Now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names, according to their generations. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, and Kedar, and Abdael, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, Hadar, and Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names, by their towns and their castles, 12 princes according to their nations. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people. And they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Assyria. And he died in the presence of all his brethren. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian, of Paddan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 old when she bare them. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison. But Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob sawed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, Sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob said, Swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. All right, that's chapter 25 of Genesis. Much quicker, much simpler chapter. Not simpler, but shorter chapter than 24 was. But chapter 25 is also, just like all these chapters, every single one of them I find is important. They all are telling something. This one goes very spiritual, it looks like. It goes very into the spiritual realm, and you'll see some very interesting similarities to God and the people, not just the people of Abraham and his children and his family line, but people in general from the get-go, from Adam and Eve, and the line of Cain and so forth. So what do we've got here? Let me go ahead and get into it, and we'll take a look at what's going on here. So of course Abraham, they talk about Abraham. So mind you, something was going on with Abraham and Sarah that they couldn't have any children. They were barren. She was barren for whatever reason. But here was Keturah, and she has a bunch of children for Abraham. Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. And then they have children and so forth. But he still gave everything he had to Isaac. Even though obviously we do see later on that Ishmael is still in the picture. Ishmael is around. He helps Isaac bury Abraham. But what's going on here is that, like I said, and I've mentioned, and I'll go ahead and make mention of it again. When we found out about Sarah and Abraham, we found out that she was barren a long time ago, back in like chapter, 12 or something. 12, 13, we heard that she was barren. But what's going on is that I make mention that they were brother and sister. They were half siblings, and we are told later on, the Israelites are told, that was not something they should be doing. They should not be having sexual affairs with family members, close family. And that would have been close family, and they shouldn't have been doing it. And that's probably one of the reasons why God made her barren for so long, until the appointed time. She was barren. There was no reason they should have children. They were brother and sister. But here we have Abraham taking a new wife, Keturah, and obviously there's probably no relationship to her. She's probably one of the people from the area, maybe, or she could have been from Egypt. I don't really know, but hold on. Oh my goodness, sneezes. But she has no problem conceiving. Also, there's no issue about his age, apparently. There's, nobody's thinking that he's getting too old, or, nobody's saying like, wow, they're old for having kids. So that means Keturah may have been very young, comparatively speaking. She could have been, Isaac didn't have any kids. He has his kids when he's 40. And a lot of these people, were probably 30. So Keturah could have very well been under that age of 50. So this would have been something that, She herself would have been much younger than Abraham, probably. Um, Not necessarily, but clearly there's no mention of, hey, even she's old and she's even giving kids, but it could have been the same. Maybe she was also very old too. Who knows? But they have some children. Nonetheless, Abraham gives all that he has unto Isaac. And of course, these names are all important. I won't go too deep into them right now. It's something that we'll have to look at later. But these lines are all very important because we're going to see them pop up later on. And you do see Midianites later on. And we do see, like, let me take a look at this map, for example. I think this map is going to show some of these people. The Canaanites, they got the pillars, the Hittites, the Moabites. If you remember, Moab was from Lot. The Ammonites, the Hittites, the Girgashites. Let me see. Do we see any of these guys? Zimron, Midian, Ishbak. We don't really see any of these names. So this is probably not the map I'm looking for. Let's take a look at another map. Let's take a look at Israel's early inhabitants. So this is kind of that same Girgashites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites. Jebusites, are they one of them? No. Jokshan, Kenites, Midianites, Zimronites, Zimites. Let me see. No, I guess I'm not really seeing any of these same people. Here's the Zidianians, but that's nobody in particular. But anyway, the point of the matter is these people are gonna all of these are his children. So just like Ishmael, they're all gonna probably be nations, great nations, right? But the promise is through Isaac. That's the promise and that's the covenant. God made that covenant. And what is that covenant? That covenant has to do with circumcision. Isaac is going to be the one that continues on the circumcision. All these other children, sure, they get circumcised too, and they get things too, but Abraham just sends them away. So he says, but unto the sons of the concubines, and it says concubines, and so he must mean Keturah and Hagar. Doesn't say anybody else, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't also take other concubines, but it's trying to say that Keturah and Hagar, those sons, he gave them gifts and then sent them away from Isaac while he was still led. They sent him out. All these children, they got sent out. But Isaac was the main child that got everything. He was going to inherit the kingship ultimately. And if you notice, Abraham lived to be 103 score and 15 years. That's 175 years old. 3 score is 60. 60 plus 15 is 75. So 175 years old. He lives 48 years after Sarah dies. So then he gives up. So here you see that he gave up the ghost. He died in a good old age. So he's only 175 years old, much younger. Like I said, at 175, he would have been born roughly around 290 years, about 300 years after the flood. And then he lived for 135. So he lived basically about 475. He died 475 years after the flood. And keep in mind, Shem lived until 500 years after the flood. So that's why I've said in previous chapters that Shem, who was on the ark with Noah through the flood, probably saw Abraham die. He knew Abraham. He probably came across Abraham. He probably heard of Abraham. And he probably knew when Abraham died. And Abraham died, and guess what? He was an old man. That's what they're saying. Everybody agreed Abraham was an old guy. And so Shem would have been watching this and seeing this. He's probably not a prominent figure in the world. Clearly, he probably wasn't, but he was still walking around. He was still that old, and he was seen along with some of the older guys that were there that were born right after the flood, whether they were good and bad, the good and the bad alike, whoever they may have been, probably saw this guy Abraham and heard about him and came across him and saw that he was an old guy, and by this point, he was the oldest of some of these old guys, and so that means all these people were dying young. But God had changed everything to where that even 175-year-old was considered an old man. So that gets into, like I said, this concept that physics were completely changed in the time of at the time of the flood. That people were living longer, and now they're not living as long. But they must be maybe living faster or something's going on because they clearly think they're old. I mean, 175 years old, and he thought he was old, but he wasn't old. He just was older than what people knew was possible. And once again, we see it as more confirmation that these people are dying younger and younger and younger. And we even do see that Ishmael, when Ishmael dies, he's 100 and what? He's even younger than he was 137 years old. So he's even younger than Abraham was when he died. And if you think about it, he's 137 years old. Abraham didn't have him until he was 100 years old. So he lived 137 years after so he would have been, if Abraham was still alive, Abraham would have been 237 years old. So basically, he died about 70 years before, but you could tell that even he's dying younger. This is kind of getting into that. Maybe that's the reason why, that's that point that God gave him. If he would have lived earlier, he might have actually died sooner than even Isaac. You know what I'm saying? If Isaac would have had this kid when he was 30 years old, he would have outlived him. But he didn't have him until he was 100 years old. And that's kind of like the tipping point of the ages. Is kind of, if you can understand what I'm trying to say. It's like a tipping point. So let's see what happened here. He died a good old age. Abraham died. He's 175 years old. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael, and they're together. They're still probably growing up together. They're still living together. They have some sort of a relationship, and they take him to that cave that we heard about in the field of Ephron, and they bury him. And they're just reconfirming that, look, Abraham had a place to live. Even though that's why they call him, he gave up the ghost. Later on that we find out, it's spoken of that God is the God of the living, not of the dead. And he was Abraham's God, meaning Abraham's still alive too, in a way. That's kind of what later on, far later, when Jesus comes around, we kind of hear about that. So this is right here, like I said, getting into the very spiritual, that Abraham had land in the place of Canaan, and that land was right here. That sepulcher, that was his land, and he was buried in it, and that's where his land was. That's his land. And so even after he died, you see God blessing his son Isaac, and Isaac kept going back down to that well by Laharoy, which is kind of by Beersheba down there. I'd come across it. I'd shown in this map. It's right down here somewhere, Beersheba. In another map, we've got the Laharoy. I forget, that's not the one. Where is that map? It's this one, Beer Laharoy. So he's right there somewhere. He keeps going down this. For some reason, he likes that place. That seems to be his spot. That's where he's at. That's Isaac. And then we get into verse 12, where we get into the generations of Ishmael. So now Ishmael, remember him, he's going to be an enemy. He's going to be with his hand against everybody and everybody's hand against him. So he's going to have some children, and look at them. They're Egyptian kids, so they've got some sort of Egyptian bloodline in them. And then we have their names. We've got Nebajoth and Kedar and Abda and Mibsam, and Mishma and Duma and Masa, Hadar and Tamar, Jetur, Naphish and Kedemah. So he has quite a few children himself. And so now we understand that just like the curse of death went from child to child after Adam and Eve, and just like the line of Cain was continuously cursed, we also have this same prophecy of Ishmael, that he's going to be, he's going to dwell amongst his brethren, and he's going to be kind of against them all. So these are going to also be names that are going to probably be, we're going to watch them and see what these people come from. And chances are they're going to be enemies with Israel when they come back out of Egypt after the Exodus. But here they are. These are the sons, their names, and their towns and their castles. He's got 12 princes according to their nation. And this is also getting back into like I've said in previous, there's a reflection of what's going on in heaven is also going on in the physical. So what's happening in the spiritual world is being reflected in the physical world. And so that's why we have 12 princes according to their nations. And now we have, this is the physical world. And we're going to see that same 12, that concept of 12 princes, 12 nations. And we're also going to see that coming up in the children of Jacob. After Jacob has some children down the line, we're going to see these 12 nations of Israel. So Jacob, I believe Jacob is going to have a son, and Jacob's going to also have his name changed too, I believe. And Jacob is going to be the son, right? We see that Jacob is the son of Isaac. So Jacob, right here, when we get onto that, Isaac has a son named Jacob. Jacob's going to have his name changed to Israel, and he's going to have 12 children. And those are going to be the 12 kingdoms of Israel, the 12 nations of Israel. But we're seeing it, first off, we're seeing it in Ishmael. So it's kind of a reflection of what's going on here, of what's going to happen, that he has 12 by their castles, according to the nations. And even though Ishmael is not given the promise like Isaac is given the promise, and that promise is that everyone in the world will be blessed. Everyone in the world. Ishmael is not necessarily, it's not from him that the people of the world are going to be blessed, but chances are just the people in their vicinity will be blessed. And that's what's going on here. That's why you see it. There's 12, and it's kind of just a reflection of things to come, but it's not the promise. It's definitely not the promise. That promise comes through Isaac. And so we have here that Ishmael was 137, and then he dies, and he was gathered to his people. And he tells you where they dwelt, from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Assyria. And he died in the presence of his brethren. So you can see everybody saw him die, basically kind of showing that he was up around here, it looks like, in this kind of southeast area or southwest area, on the way to Egypt. So let me see if I can find any more. It'd probably been right here. Let's take another look at a different map, maybe. Let's see. Memphis, Thebes. So he would have probably died somewhere in this area. What you see right here as Syria, I believe. So that's what's going on here, into Assyria. So let's see. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Paddan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. So you see, now I'm getting a little confused. He's a Syrian of Paddan Aram, and I thought he was up in the northeast, but Paddan Aram, Paddan Aram was Haran. Not okay, so he is up there. So that's Assyria down there, and that's Syria up here, I guess. So let me take a look at this map. Yeah, see, Syria's up here. So what am I thinking? This isn't Syria, right? This is somewhere else. This was Assyria down here in this little area. So Syria was up here, and I think maybe this was Assyria. I don't really know. I got to take a look at what country is that. Here they are with this nonsensical globe map. I don't really know what this is. The peninsula. I don't know what that's called. I forget what it's called. I thought it was... But anyway, let me see if I can't. I need to find out what it is. It's just getting on me. I got to take a look. Oh, it's Sinai, the Sinai Peninsula. Yeah, that's my bad. Sinai. And this was Syria up here. Okay. It's the Sinai Peninsula. Okay, my bad. That's my mistake. So he's 40 years old. We're just going over the generations. We went over the generations of Ishmael. So these are going to be important names. So Genesis 25 is going to be just kind of like Genesis 10 was. Genesis 10 was giving a huge outline of names and people and their locations, and we're going to see that kind of being the case here in Genesis 25. He's giving a bunch of names. Abraham died. Here's Isaac's generation when Isaac was 40 years old. So he was 40 years old when Rebekah came to be his wife. So it was basically like almost 13 years. Yeah, 13 years after Sarah died. So 13 years after Sarah dies, that's when he gets himself a wife. And so Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And so now, and the Lord was entreated of him. So now she wasn't having a child, and then finally Rebecca, he goes. It isn't until Isaac goes to God and says, "Hey God, Rebecca is barren. Please have a child. Please let her have a child." And then finally does God say, "Okay, I'll give you a child." So we're really starting to learn about the spiritual side, how much we got to go to God. We got to go to God for things. And here's Isaac learning kind of that lesson, kind of learning that lesson. And it's a special scenario where we got, once again, mirroring the spiritual and the physical world, where it says there's going to be two children struggling within her. Two nations are in thy womb. So these two nations are reflective of perhaps Isaac and Ishmael, but they're also kind of reflective of Cain and Abel. And it's also kind of reflective of Adam and the serpent and Adam. Because the serpents would have come first, and then Adam would have come next. And it was the serpent that convinced Adam and Eve to sin, right? So we've got basically the younger are the stronger, and the elder shall serve the younger. And so that's what we saw with the snake and all that. We know for a fact that, the wicked, that's that line, line of Canaan, kind of line of Cain. And we also see it like these are like the spiritual creatures, the spiritual, the angels of some sort. The angel that fell was the serpent of some sort. And then we also saw it with Cain killing Abel. And then we saw it with Ishmael is older than Isaac, but Isaac, Israel, the Ishmaelites are still going to be kind of serving Isaac. Isaac's the stronger one here. He's the one with the legal authority. And then now we're seeing it here coming out physically. We're seeing it actually be two twins. And we're going to see that Esau is going to be foolish and not so good when it comes to God. And that Jacob is going to be the one that the promise goes through. So we still got this promise coming out of Isaac. And we do see that by the end of this, we see that Jacob and Esau are contending with each other, and Esau comes in and he's just hungry. All he wants is some stew. We call it red pottage, but it's like stew. It's like a soup. And he comes and he's hungry, and he's so hungry apparently he can't suffer to not eat one meal. Apparently that he tells Jacob, and it could be a joke. He could be taking of it like a joke, obviously. He says, "Look, I'm about to die. What profit shall this birthright do to me?" And he says, "Swear to me." And so Esau sells his birthright to Jacob for some bread and stew. And he eats and drank and rose up and went on his way. And thus Esau despised his birthright. So what is this birthright that we're talking about? Well, they would have known. They should have known. Isaac would have told them, just as Abraham would have told them, that, hey, Abraham walked with God and God gave him a great promise. And that promise was that we're going to inherit this land of Canaan and so forth. And all the world is going to be blessed because of us. Well, Esau clearly didn't even care. Esau didn't, like I said, he's just like the normal people that they hear about God and they hear about all of this history that's written about in the Bible. And they're like, whatever, I don't care. It doesn't mean much to me. It's not real. I think it's probably a fairy tale. It's just stories that, our grandpa told us, even though they don't really mean anything. I wasn't there. It doesn't mean anything. And that's kind of what's going on here. So Esau comes out and Jacob's on his heel, and then they grow old, and we see that Esau is a cunning hunter and Jacob was a plain man, but he's also dwelling in tents. And once again, we remember from the curse that Noah made against Canaan back in chapter 9, we find out that, the Canaanites were going to serve Shem and Japheth. The people of Japheth were going to dwell in the tents of Shem. So here is Jacob dwelling in tents. And Jacob, also just like Abraham, is from the line of Shem. And so these are those tents that they're talking about. These are the beginning of the tents. He's dwelling in tents. So that means he's being mobile. He's kind of going from place to place in tents. He's not really living in a structure, in a house that's built, because they haven't inherited the land yet. But he knows, because his dad has been telling them that, hey, we're going to inherit the land someday. God gave proof to Abraham And Esau clearly doesn't care, but Jacob cares, and that's why Jacob is probably making already an effort to manifest. He's saying, "Oh, I'm gonna need some tents, so might as well make sense. I don't live, And on top of that, he says, "Give me your birthright," because technically Esau should have been the birthright, just like Isaac was the firstborn. He was considered the firstborn of Abraham. Oh, and come to see it again, you see that I told you that. I did make mention that. It's the same thing. We got Isaac is the younger of Ishmael, but Ishmael's people are going to serve Isaac. The young serve the old. You see what I'm saying? Or the older is going to serve the younger. And that's already what's happening here, and it's already possible, and you see it. And Esau, who should have gotten the inheritance, the promise should have gone through Esau. Esau should have been the one that says, "Hey, I." He should have been the one saying to God, "Hey God, make me a blessing to all the world. Make my seed a blessing to all the whole world." But he didn't even care. He wasn't thinking about the future. He didn't think about it. And you see again, once again, he's a hunter. Uh, Whereas Jacob is living in tents. He's a wanderer, kind of. And it's just mirroring everything kind of that we've seen, where the older fall and the younger take control, and the younger are the leaders. And that's what happened in the Garden of Eden, kind of, where we have the younger people, which is Adam, compared to the demon of the snake. And we're going to see that ultimately all those demons that come from that kind of spiritual creatures, they're going to obviously serve the humans, and the humans are going to be the most important, even though they came after the animals. And the humans are the most important. And so that's why Jacob sells he buys his birthright for some bread and a couple of, like a little stew, a little bit of soup. And Esau just didn't care about this promise from God, but Jacob did. And that's what's going on here. And that's why this is also an important story. Esau didn't care. He wasn't thinking about the future. He wasn't thinking about God. He was just living day to day, probably. He was just living in the land of the humans, human concern, earthly, worldly concerns. He was just, where am I going to eat? What's my next meal coming from? That's all he thought about. And that's why when he was here, "Oh, I'm gonna die. I need a meal. Where's my next meal coming from? Give it to me, Jacob." And Jacob's like, "Not unless you sell me my birthright." And Esau's like, "What are you talking about? I don't know. What's a birthright? Whatever. Take it. Give me some stew." And so that's why it says, "What profit shall this birthright do to me?" It doesn't mean anything. It's a promise for the future generations. It's a promise for all the people of the world sometime long away from now. For them, what does this birthright have anything to do with me? Right now I need some stew. I need something to eat. So that's what it means. He wasn't thinking of the future, but Jacob was. And Jacob cared. Jacob knew God. Jacob saw God. Jacob was the one that wrestles with God. But I'm going to go ahead and end it here. That was Genesis 25. It's not too long. It's a lot more that I could say, especially about that spiritual kind of mirroring, where it's mirroring that younger is stronger than the older, and the older serves the younger. And that's going to be kind of a common theme that's being established. It's a spiritual theme that we as humans are more important than the animals, even though the animals came first. Does that make sense? I mean, that's going to kind of be why the great beast, that's why he's a beast. That's why in Revelation, he's a giant beast, Leviathan. He's a beast from the ocean. He comes from the ocean. And it all kind of stems from that line of Cain. And after the flood, basically the line of Cain, if they were spiritual creatures that inhabited bodies, they were supposed to only stay in the water, in the great deep. And then we do see, obviously, as soon as the humans are running around after the flood again, we see them turning back into mighty men, which is kind of representative of the line of Cain, stopped inhabiting the fish and went back into the human bodies, even though they weren't allowed to do so anymore. God had said, no more human bodies, no more animal bodies. The only bodies you can inhabit are the fish bodies out in the ocean. And obviously we see these demons leaving the fish, coming back into animal bodies, human bodies. And it's like they themselves are the older, which was, they're the line of Cain. They were the oldest. They were Adam's eldest. Cain was Adam's. Cain should have inherited the world. But instead, he went and he murdered his little brother. And then he had another little brother by the name of Seth, right? Seth. And Seth is now the legal heir. So from the line of Seth, that's where we see Abraham coming from. All these humans are from the line of Seth. None of them are from Cain. Cain isn't allowed in them, but and that means Cain will serve them. The oldest, the youth will be the youth shall be the leader. So Seth is the leader, and the older one being this wicked Cain and his line and his wicked people that are potentially light. They're potentially creatures of light, potentially these what we would think as aliens, what we think as ghosts, what we think as even though God called them men, they are in fact men. They're not the same exact men that we see. And these men are the ones that were born and were given the flesh as a skin of flesh to be clothed in. So anyway, though, I'm going to end it here. This will probably be, I don't know if I'll make any more videos today. I went through Genesis 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25 this morning. It's taken me about 6 hours to get through them almost, but I'm going to go ahead and end it now. And if you're watching, I'll just say whoever's watching, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I pray God blesses you, and I pray that we all bless Jesus Christ, and may Jesus Christ bless all of us. Amen.